By most accounts, this past week was one of the most difficult in the young presidency of Barack Obama. At the heart of it all was the public upheaval over $165 million in bonuses paid to employees of AIG, a company largely responsible for bringing the world's financial system to its knees and now being propped up by U.S. taxpayers. The bonuses touched off a cultural war between Wall Street and Main Street, both of whose support the president needs to help stabilize the economy. After campaigning in California to drum up support for his $3.6 trillion budget, the president sat down with us in the Oval Office for a conversation about the AIG debacle, the economy, and getting the hang of the world's most difficult job.
Were you surprised by the intensity of the reaction and the hostility from the AIG bonus debacle?
I wasn't surprised by it. Our team wasn't surprised by it. The one thing that I've tried to emphasize, though, throughout this week, and will continue to try to emphasize during the course of the next several months as we dig ourselves out of this economic hole that we're in, is we can't govern out of anger. We've got to try to make good decisions based on the facts in order to put people back to work, to get credit flowing again. And I'm not going to be distracted by what's happening day to day. I've got to stay focused on making sure that we're getting this economy moving again.
The president ordered his Treasury Secretary, Timothy Geithner, to use every legal means to recover the bonus money from AIG. If it's not repaid, it will be deducted from the company's next bailout payment. But the House decided to extract its own revenge, passing a bill that would impose a tax of up to 90% on the AIG bonuses and on the bonuses of anyone making more than $250,000 a year who works for a financial institution receiving more than $5 billion in bailout funds.
I mean, you're a constitutional law professor.
Yeah.
You think this bill is constitutional?
Well, I think that as a general proposition, you don't want to be passing laws that are just targeting a handful of individuals. You want to pass laws that have some broad applicability. And as a general proposition, I think you certainly don't want to use the tax code to punish people. I think that you've got a pretty egregious situation here that people are understandably upset about. So let's see if there are ways of doing this that are both legal, that are constitutional, that uphold our basic principles of fairness, but don't hamper us from getting the banking system back on track.
You got a piece of legislation that could affect tens of thousands of people. Some of these people probably had nothing to do with the financial crisis, and some of them probably deserve the bonuses that they got.
Well,
is that fair?
Well, and that's why we're going to have to take a look at this legislation carefully. Clearly, the AIG folks getting those bonuses didn't make sense. And one of the things that I have to do is to communicate to Wall Street that given the current crisis that we're in, they can't expect help from taxpayers, but they enjoy all the benefits that they enjoyed before the crisis happened. You get a sense that in some institutions that has not sunk in, that you can't go back to the old way of doing business, certainly not on the taxpayer's dime. Well, now the flip side is that Main Street has to understand unless we get these banks moving again, then we can't get this economy to recover, and we don't want to cut off our nose to spite our face.
Your Treasury Secretary, Tim Geithner, has been under a lot of pressure this week, and there have been people in Congress calling for his head. Have there been discussions in the White House about replacing him?
No.
Has he volunteered to or come to you and said, do you think I should step down?
No, and he shouldn't. And if he were to come to me, I'd say, sorry, buddy, you still got the job. But look, he's got a lot of stuff on his plate, and he is doing a terrific job. And I take responsibility for not, I think, having given him as much help as he needs.
Obama says Geithner is not only responsible for the banks, the bailouts, and the automobile industry, he also has to make sure the money is being spent wisely and to report to Congress. Yet nearly a dozen high-level Treasury Department jobs remain unfilled, and Geithner still has no deputy. Two people under consideration for the post withdrew their names after going through the vetting process.
This whole confirmation process, as I mentioned earlier, has gotten pretty tough. It's been always tough. It's gotten tougher in the age of 24/7 news cycles. And a lot of people who we think are about to serve in the administration and the Treasury suddenly say, well, you know what, I don't want to go through some of the scrutiny and embarrassment in addition to taking huge cuts in pay.
Have you offered some of these high-level positions at Treasury to people that have turned them down?
Absolutely. Yeah. And not because people didn't want to serve. I think that people just felt that, the process has gotten very onerous.
Your Treasury Secretary's plan, Geithner's plan, and your plan, really, for solving the banking crisis was met with very, very, very tepid response. And you had a lot of people criticizing. A lot of people said they didn't understand it. A lot of people said it didn't have enough details to solve the problem. I know you're coming out with something next week on this, but I mean, these criticisms were coming from people like Warren Buffett, people who had supported you and you had counted as being...
And Warren still does support me. But I think that understand Warren's also a big player in the financial markets who's a major owner of Wells Fargo. And so he's got a perspective from the perspective of somebody who is part owner of a bank. You've got members of Congress who've got a different perspective, which is we don't want to spend any more taxpayer money. You've got a whole host of players, all of whom may have a completely different solution, right? And one of the challenges that Tim Geithner has had is the same challenge that anybody would have in this situation. People want a lot of contradictory things. The banks would love a lot of taxpayer money with no strings attached. Folks in Congress, as well as the American people, would love to fix the banks without spending any money. And so at a certain point, you've got just a very difficult line to walk.
You need the financial community to solve this crisis.
I do.
Do you think that the people on Wall Street and the people in the financial community that you need trust you, believe in you?
Part of my job is to communicate to them, look, I believe in the market, I believe in financial innovation, and I believe in success. I want them to do well. But what I also know is that the financial sector was out of balance. You look at how finance used to operate just 20 years ago or 25 years ago. People, if you went into investment banking, you were making 20 times what a teacher made. You weren't making 200 times what a teacher made.
There is a perception right now, at least in New York, which is where I live and work, that people feel they thought that you were going to be supportive. And now I think there are a lot of people that say, look, we're not going to be able to keep our best people. They're not going to stay and work here for $250,000 a year when they can go work for a hedge fund if they can find one that's still working and make a lot more.
I've told them directly, because I've heard some of this, they need to spend a little time outside of New York. Because, if you go to North Dakota, or you go to Iowa, or you go to Arkansas, where folks would be thrilled to be making $75,000 a year without a bonus, then I think they'd get a sense of why people are frustrated. I think we have to understand the severity of the crisis that we're in right now. The fact is that because of bad bets made on Wall Street, there have been enormous losses. I mean, there were a whole bunch of folks who, on paper, if you looked at quarterly reports, were wildly successful, selling derivatives that turned out to be completely worthless.
And insuring them.
And insuring them. Now, gosh, I don't think it's me being anti-Wall Street, just to point out that the best and the brightest didn't do too well on that front. And that, maybe the incentive structures that have been set up have not produced the kinds of long-term growth that I think everybody's looking for.
were you surprised at the depth of this recession when you got here? Did you know it was this bad?
I don't think that we anticipated how steep the decline would be, particularly in employment. I mean, if you look at just hundreds of thousands